Who Gets to Decide? A liberty-based podcast that brings a little piece of sanity to a confused society drowning in a culture of craziness. And here is your host, Seth Martin.
Well, all right. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Who Gets to Decide. This is episode 647. I'm Seth Martin, your host. Thank you for joining me this evening. Glad you're here and always happy you're listening. Well, today there's war going on, right? Really kind of Middle Eastern war, but maybe spreading quickly. We don't really know. But I wanted to talk a little bit about it because there's, really what this boils down to, I don't know. Some people will say it boils down to terrorism. It boils down to the global order that we all agreed to after World War II. And I think it's really more than that. I think it boils down to hubris, and also empires just don't die willingly, right? And so what you've got is, and I hate to be critical of our country because I think we're basically a good country, but it's very difficult to look at what's going on and just feel like the people that are running our country don't know what the hell they're doing, It's funny, Trump, he was on TV, a year ago, talking about how Netanyahu didn't know what the hell he was doing or whatever. He's got a famous quote. But I think just this hubris, because we spend $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion or whatever it is on our military, we believe that we are unbeatable. We're impervious to the laws of economics and production and things like that. And so I want to delve into that today. I think in general, empires would rather go to war than they would die. Like an empire doesn't want to die. It'll take everybody down with it before it goes quietly into that good night, And I think that's kind of what we're witnessing. I think we're in the very beginning of what will turn out to be a fairly rapid decline, possibly. And I just want to expose you to somebody today who's kind of laying that out. And, if I was the Trump administration, I would get this guy into the White House very quickly and start talking to him about why he thinks this would happen and what we can do to stop it. Because if things play out the way this guy, Dr. Jiang Xueqin, or however you say his name, it plays out, I'll just call him Dr. Jiang because that's what they call him on the internet, then we're in for some real problems, okay? Big problems. Not like, war's going to come to America and shores and, there's going to be bombs being dropped. I don't think any of that's going to happen, at least not based on what this guy's saying. But we could have a real problem, economically. And I think in general, so today's show, I'm calling it War and Hubris. Or maybe that should be hubris and war. Not sure which one comes first. But, I think there's a lack of understanding of just how interdependent the world is and how complex our society is. It's not like World War II. I mean, you go back to World War II, the beginning of World War II, something like 40% of Americans were living on farms or something, 45%, maybe more. I don't know the exact number, but a huge number of people were living on family farms and farms in general, and just a very low standard of living. I mean, just barely getting by kind of thing. And today we have a very high standard of living, although, the government is always trying to undermine that with the creation of money and credit, bank credit and the economy, constantly trying to outpace our ability to produce goods and services. But even with that, we have a very high standard of living, okay? And so this standard of living depends on an interdependency globally that I think most people just don't think is real or don't understand it or something. And I've been talking on this show for a long time that the fake money, the dishonest money and the way we run our economy, it's kind of a phony economy in the sense that I don't know how many people are either working directly for government or indirectly working for government. This is not a real economy. People working for government is not part of the real economy, okay? A real economy is everybody produces something and then trades with other people. And I think what you're going to see today when you hear Dr. Jiang talk is you're going to start to see that. You're going to start to see that, oh, wow, we're not as invincible as, President Trump likes to think, or as we like to stick out our chest and pound it and pretend to be. We are actually a global citizen. I hate that term, by the way, but because I always felt like American citizenship meant something special. And to be a global citizen, I don't like that. It's just, I don't like it even now. But there is a global interdependency that we have on one another. We're all here. We're all in it together, so to speak, okay? And with a very complex division of labor and economic system, this has never been more true than it is today. And I just don't think these things are being considered. I think people look at it and go, well, we could start in on the plan before they even consider what the consequences of the plan would be. We see little flashes of this, right? We see in Vietnam, the jungle warrior kind of took us down, right? The insurgency of the jungle warrior. Where's the enemy? We can't find them, So there's that. And then there's later on, as we get into Afghanistan, you have this insurgency, an army that's not even wearing, insignia or whatever. They're just people planting roadside bombs or blowing themselves up in cafes and taking out soldiers. You can see the limits of what military power can produce. There are limits. There's limits to everything. Okay. There's nothing that doesn't have a limit unless you're talking about like God. God has no limits. But people, the modern world that we live in, these things all have limits. And I just thought this talk from Dr. Jiang was really good at exploring these limits. Now, let me set this up just briefly before we begin. This first clip I'm going to show you is pre-election, pre-2024 election. Okay, so this guy is teaching a class, and it's like the fall semester maybe before the 2024 election. I think I said 2020. I meant 2024. Okay, so the most recent election of Donald Trump. So just to set that up, that's the timing, okay? And I just want you to hear what he says, and then we'll stop it, talk a little bit about it, and then we're going to go into this presentation that he gives that's more recent about what's going on in the world with this conflict with Iran, and basically they brought the entire region into the conflict, essentially. All right, let's continue here.
In this class this semester, I'm making 3 big predictions, right? First is that Trump will win in November. Second is that the United States will go to war against Iran. And the third big prediction is that the United States will lose this war, which will forever change the global order.
Okay. Now, those are very, those are very big predictions. I mean, this guy's not predicting which direction some stock is going to move, right? He's predicting some global outcome. And 2 out of the 3, notice, are correct. Trump won the election, okay? So just a reminder, this guy's talking about, this pre-election, right? Some September, October, sometime around that time frame. And he's predicting that Trump will win the election. He's predicting much further out now that Trump will start a war with Iran. Okay, number 2. And number 3, he's saying that we're going to lose this war. He's actually making 4 predictions here that we're going to lose this war with Iran. Okay, and that it'll change the global order forever. Wow. That's some pretty powerful stuff. So making some statements like that, especially since he got the first 2 out of the 4 right, I'm very interested to know what this guy is talking about, where his thinking is. And I think you're going to be pretty surprised. It really just boils down to geography and global flows of economic goods. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into this next clip, and we're going to talk about it.
Even if you don't really know the war, even if you don't know the participants, even if you don't know the weaponry, this map will tell you exactly how this war will progress. All right, so some certain things to keep in mind about this map. This is what we call this area, okay, really small, it's 33 kilometers wide, okay? People can swim across it. It's really, really narrow, okay? This small area, guys, it's called the Strait of Hormuz, all right? And it's important because it's really the center of the world. This one area is the nexus, the pivot of the world. Let me explain why. First of all, from the GCC, you have 20% of all the world's oil flowing through this narrow strait. Where does it go, guys? It goes to Asia, India, Pakistan, South Korea, China, Japan. India depends on 60% of its oil from this area. China depends on 40%. Japan, 75%. Prime Minister Takaichi of Japan has said that, listen, if the Strait of Hormuz closes, we will run out of oil in about 8-9 months. The entire Japanese economy would collapse in 8-9 months if the Strait of Hormuz were to close. And guess what? The Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz, okay? So we can expect that the entire global economy will suffer greatly over the next few months, all right? So that's point number one. Point number two is, okay, so the GCC sends oil across the Strait of Hormuz, and what do they get back in return? Food, guys. All right, so people don't appreciate the GCC, but it is really the linchpin of the American empire. Because what is the American empire? The American empire is the petrodollar, all right? The idea of the petrodollar is this. The US dollar is worth nothing. It's only valuable if people want it. But the GCC says that if you want oil from us, you have to pay us in US dollars, okay? Then that is the basis of the value of the US dollar. So if the GCC collapses, the American economy and the American empire both collapse at the same time. The problem, though, is the GCC is an artificial construct of empire. It does not exist naturally. Why? Because there's no food, there's no oil, no water. Okay, guys? No food, no water. So these cities are able to grow in the millions because of all these petrodollars flowing in. If you close off the Strait of Hormuz, there's no food coming in, right? They're all going to starve. How much?
All right, let me stop right here, because this is kind of the argument. This kind of goes back to the whole climate change, and let's get rid of oil and go to solar and wind and all this kind of stuff. People don't realize all these people that live in these GCC countries, you know, UAE, Dubai, Saudi Arabia, all these places, they would just die, or huge numbers of them would die if you didn't have oil, okay? As you can see what he's talking about, and he's going to talk about the water portion here in a minute, but basically the GCC countries send out oil to the world, and the world sends back food. Okay, well, if the Strait of Hormuz is closed, then 80% of their food comes through that strait. Now, I suppose you can create some other avenue, you know, and truck it across or something. I don't know, but what he's saying is, he hasn't actually said it yet, but you basically would starve, and vast numbers of people. You know, these places have, like he said, millions of people in them, but without oil, these places don't have any people in them. So anytime you're talking about, okay, we're all going to go to solar and wind and all this stuff, a whole bunch of people die. Okay. And maybe a whole bunch of people are going to end up dying anyway because of this situation. But this is the complexity of a modern world. I mean, there are just places on Earth that just don't naturally exist without this modern economy moving things from where they don't exist to where they need to be because there are people there. And this is just a huge part of the world we live in today. And it's beyond me that you can rise to President of the United States and all the advisors to the President of the United States, and they don't have anybody that knows this. I mean, they don't have anybody that knows that if you poke this bear and you create a big problem here, that I don't know, a huge chunk of the world's population could die because they can't get food and water. That's pretty insane. That's pretty reckless. And I've made a prediction on this show, and probably because of this guy's predictions, I think the Republicans are going to lose the midterms. Trump is going to get impeached for real this time, not on some trumped up thing, no pun intended, but he's going to get impeached because he started this war. And this war is going to have major, major consequences. And he's going to get impeached. He's going to get kicked out of office. That's my prediction. This is a huge mistake on Trump's part. Huge mistake. And yes, okay, I'm anti-war, but I have good reasons to be. And a lot of these good reasons are, being talked about in this presentation by Jiang. So without further ado, let's continue because it's very important what he's talking about here.
Food that the GCC get from overseas, 80%. 80% of all the food it consumes comes from overseas, that it imports. It doesn't grow by itself, it imports, all right? So the Strait of Hormuz is really key. And again, the Iranians will close it in order to strangle the global economy and therefore bankrupt the American empire, all right? Second thing you will notice is these mountains. These mountains is what we call Iran, all right? This is Iran. This is GCC, okay? This is not a fair matchup, right? Because these are mountains. And what can you do in mountains? Well, you can hide rocket bases. You can hide drone bases. You can hide missiles. And that's the entire Iranian offensive strategy, all right? From here, they can hide missiles and drones from which to attack the GCC. And what are they attacking? They're attacking three things, right? They're attacking American military bases. That's number one, okay? Is it possible for the Americans to defend against these attacks? The answer is no, it's not. It's the silliest thing in the world. You have all these bases in the Middle East, but you cannot defend them against the Iranians. That's kind of strange. Okay, but that's number one. Number two is oil and energy. How hard is it to blow up an oil field with a drone? Not hard at all. Can you defend these oil fields? No, you cannot, all right? Number three, and this is most important, is water. Okay, you guys don't know this, but the GCC has little access to fresh water. So the only way that it can produce water is what we call desalination plants, okay? These factories that take salt water and then through electrochemical process, turn it into fresh water for the population to use. 60% of the water supply in the GCC comes from desalination plants, okay? 60%. Is it hard to blow up a desalination plant using a drone? The answer is, it's very easy. You understand? Okay? So you have this absurd situation where Iran is a mountain fortress where it can hide its offensive capacity, and the GCC, it's just this desert, this flat desert, and it is exposed to attack, and there's nothing it can do about it, okay? So at any point in this war, the Iranians can choose to just destroy the entire GCC, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it, okay?
All right. So the point that I want to bring up is that, okay, oil, 20% of the world's oil comes out of this, the Persian Gulf area through the Strait of Hormuz, and food, 80% of the food that the GCC countries consume comes in through the Strait of Hormuz to feed the population that wouldn't naturally exist there if you couldn't send them food. And then he brings up a great point. It's also a water situation. It's a desert, okay? There is no rainwater to collect in, big reservoirs that you can then suck water out of, treat the water and, put into pipes and send to people's homes and stuff. No, what they do is they suck massive amounts of salt water out of the sea, and they run it through a desalination process, which basically, just like the word says, it takes the salt out of the water, and that creates their water supply. But these are like factories. This is like bombing an oil refinery or a factory that makes bombs or something. You can bomb it, and then it's out of commission. It can't do what it's supposed to do. Now you got people that don't have water. So you talk about potentially a massive migration issue. Massive numbers of people leaving, huge parts of the GCC countries and migrating into other parts of the world and stuff. Huge refugee problem. So this is a colossal disaster just waiting to happen. And all I hear all day long on TV, on CNN and Fox, is just people, showing images that the State Department releases where we sunk a ship or we blew up a building or we blew up some truck or whatever it is. And it's like, man, talk about missing the forest for the trees. This thing, if it keeps going, is going to end up right where this guy is talking about. And if it ends up there, we got major, major global issues. Okay. And you could dismiss this and say, oh, Seth, I don't know. Who is this guy? He doesn't know anything. Let me tell you, it's like he says, it's just geography. It's not rocket science here. And by the way, one of the worst things about Trump, and I've said this over and over and over again, and one of the reasons I didn't vote for him in 2016 is I don't know what he believes in. What does he believe in? Does he believe in liberty? Does he believe in just a better deal? What does a better deal look like in a situation like this? The best deal on the table is to never get into a situation like this. And yet his ego and his hubris and his lack of knowledge of history, his lack of knowledge about economics and production and how we had this majorly complicated, division of labor and how we all are so dependent on one another. This is just escapes Trump's brain. Okay. And look, I like the guy. I mean, still think he's better than Kamala Harris. But this is part of the problem with America is we just don't have a choice, right? They work this crazy system to give us two choices, and I'm holding up air fingers quotes, that aren't really choices at all. They don't really satisfy the needs of not just America, but the globe. What the globe does not need, what the world does not need is like a Hitler-esque, and I hesitate to call him that because I don't really believe he's like Hitler. I think he's just dumb. Okay. I think Trump is just not very bright. Okay. It just goes to show you that you can actually make a lot of money and not be that bright. Especially if you're willing to bend a few rules and things like that. So, but we're traveling 1,000 miles an hour straight for 300 foot thick, concrete block, and we're going to smash right into it. I mean, that's what I see here. And so, look, we need to talk about this. We need to spread this information. We need to share this with our fellow citizens and make sure that we can stop this thing before it gets out of hand, because it's headed that direction right now. All right, let's continue.
But Iran also has a weakness, okay? And this is fundamental. So Iran also has a water problem, okay? So for the longest time, they suffered a drought issue, okay? Just climate change. And so what the plan of the Israelis and Americans is destroy the water supply of the Iranians. Because the fortress, it is a mountain fortress, but it can also be a mountain prison as well, where people are trapped inside with no access to water. Okay, so what we're going to see right now, we're already seeing attacks on civilian infrastructure, hospitals. In the future, you'll see attacks on water supply, on dams, on reservoirs, on power plants. The idea is to make Iran so inhabitable that the people will have to rebel against the people, or there'll be a refugee crisis in Iran. Okay? So as you can see from this map, this war, it is the end of the world. Okay? Both sides have the potential to destroy each other. It's really a question of how far do they want to go. All right? We can also say this is almost a game of chicken. Okay? We can blow each other up. How far do you want to go? And the problem is this.
All right, before we get into chicken, let me just point out what a terrible thing it is to intentionally destroy a country's water infrastructure so that they can't get water. You know what a crisis that is? I mean, without even blowing too many things up, you can cause just a tremendous humanitarian event, right? And there's something like 92 million people live in Iran, okay? And by the same token, you're talking about starving, a huge number of people in the GCC countries. This is really unbelievable that, somebody with some game theory knowledge is not looking at this and going, Mr. President, you might want to pull this back a little bit, because if this continues to escalate, we're going to have a real problem, and here's what it's going to look like. I mean, why is nobody talking to this buffoon in the presidency? And by the way, before you judge me too much about Trump, I feel like all presidents are buffoons, okay? I think they're all stupid. They're not stupid in the way like, some kid in your classroom is stupid, okay? They're stupid in the fact that they think they know everything. That's what makes them stupid. They don't have any humility. They have this ego. You have to be this way to be president, okay? Nobody can win the presidency unless you just have this ginormous ego. That's the only way you can win that job, okay? But the problem with having a huge ego like that is you get something like this. You get this potential of, destroying the world. Not intentionally. I don't think Trump, set out to destroy the world. I don't think that's his intention. I think he's a fairly nice guy. I don't think he wants to hurt anybody. Okay. But the point is, you get in this presidency, you're surrounded by all these military people. They're all telling you how great you are, Mr. President. You're making the best decisions, and you're such a brilliant, and you're playing 4D chess. And, you start to buy into all this bullshit. And you kind of lose sight of the fact that, oh, I'm a human being. Oh, and people living in Iran are human beings. And the people living in, Saudi Arabia and Dubai and UAE, and they're all human beings. And we've actually heard Trump say that he doesn't want to hurt anybody. But the natural end to all this is hurting and killing, just huge numbers of people. And it's beyond me that nobody's talked to him about this. It's really hard. It shows a huge flaw, I think, in our system. It used to be nuclear, right? Everybody could understand the whole nuclear thing. Oh, a guy hits a button, and then they hit a button, and next thing you know, we're lobbing, these nuclear weapons over at each other, and that's the end of the world. But this is a kind of a different version of the same thing. I mean, we are so integrated now that, most people don't know how to live without being able to go to a grocery store or going to a gas station to fill up their car, or, hell, some women today, I mean, I hate to pick on you if you're listening, you're a woman. Some women today don't even know how to cook. Are you kidding me? How are we going to survive if we don't even know how to cook? So, I mean, it's just, it's amazing that I don't know, we live in this world somehow where we think technology somehow absolves us of all these things. But technology is brought to us through this complex maze of cooperation. That's how we have the technology. If you take away the cooperation, there is no technology. So I don't know. I think this is this is kind of what I always talk about on the show, but I think what Dr. Jiang here is showing us is he's showing us a real example of how technology is not going to matter. It doesn't matter how much technology you have. If you're not eating or you can't get fresh water, you're going to die. Okay. That's how the human body works. And so there are limits to what the human body can take, when you starve it of food and water. Okay. And so he's laying out a scenario where that is, very much the real possibility here.
The problem is that the Iranians are Shia, which believes in martyrdom, and you've killed the religious leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. So they're willing to go very, very far. The GCC countries are Muslim, but they're materialistic. They love money. And also, most of the population are expatriates, foreigners. 9% of Dubai are foreigners. Guess what's going to happen if they suffer? They're going to run away. Okay? So this is not a fair matchup. The big question that people have is, first of all, are the Americans going to use ground troops? Because the only way that you can defeat Iran is by using ground troops, okay? That's a big question we'll look at in the next few weeks. Will America send its army, 500,000, 2 million soldiers to topple the government? Okay, that's question number one. Question number two, nuclear weapons. If you lose the war, would you choose to use nuclear weapons? Okay, that's another big question that we have, okay? Another big question that we have is who gets involved? Because this situation is so dire that Europe, okay, specifically Germany, France, and Britain are talking about entering this war. And guess what? If that happens, it is possible that Russia and China will also enter this war on the side of the Iranians. This is World War III, okay? Because of the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, because of the importance of the Middle East, everyone has to get involved at some point. And we're going to use game theory to really try to understand what's happening on the ground and where this could lead us. All right.
Before we get into that, this is just a colossal. I know what some of you might be thinking. Okay, you're probably sitting there and you're thinking, I don't know, Seth. I'm watching TV every night. Looks like we're doing really well. We're taking this, we're taking that, and we're sinking ships, and it's great. And America, we're killing everybody, or at least the people that are trying to kill us, and it all looks good. Okay, but I'm just telling you, these things have a tendency to take on a life of their own. Things tend to be good until they're not. Okay. And then when they're not, there's no way to unwind it. Okay. Once you put troops on the ground, for example, and then Great Britain and France enter, and then Russia and China enter, there's no telling where this thing will go. I mean, it just becomes unbelievably unpredictable. Dr. Jiang himself will not even be able to predict what will happen if all these other players get involved, or if we put troops on the ground to try to win, to try to isolate Iran's ability to impact the Strait of Hormuz. And not only that, but it's going to take a long time. I mean, it's not like you put troops on the ground and 6 weeks later it's over. The whole time the troops are on the ground, there's no ships going through there, because the people that run the ships, they don't want to lose their ship, right? So they're just not shipping anything. Meanwhile, all the starving is happening and there's no energy. We're all ripping up our backyards and planting gardens or something. I mean, it's just a bad situation. I know there's some of you out there that love your government way more than I do. I always make the distinction between the government and the country. The country I love America. America's great. America's a beautiful place. It has awesome people. The government of America is really, really bad. And it's been bad for a long time. And if we somehow come out of this unscathed, it'll be a miracle, because it's been a long time coming. With the types of things we're doing around the world are just such that, sooner or later you're going to get bitten. It's like if your shtick is to go out and I can tame rattlesnakes or whatever, and maybe you do 1,000 shows and you're just really good at it, and you pat them on the head and you're playing your flute or whatever, but that's your deal. That's your career. Eventually one of those snakes is going to bite you, and probably you're going to die. Okay. And that's kind of the situation. That's the way I feel about our foreign policy in America. It's going to be good until it's not. And there's already problems, right? He's talking about the petrodollar. There's already, I don't know, was it like 6 or 8 years ago, there was roughly, 80% of all transactions around the globe were in dollars. It's below 50 now, below 50. You close the Strait of Hormuz and let's say the GCC is forced to begin to sell oil in non-dollar denominated shipments, that alone will bring America to its knees. Okay, that complete disillusion of the dollar, and what you'll begin to see is the real problems of not producing. Okay, we don't produce enough. We don't produce enough to take care of our own population. Okay. And that's going to be very obvious once we are cut off from the imports that we can buy, because our currency is no good. Nobody wants it anymore. It won't buy anything. Those are real problems. Okay. So we need to avoid those. And the first step is to end this Iran conflict. And I saw somebody on YouTube the other day saying, might have been on Piers Morgan or something, saying that we should end this immediately and Trump should go on TV and apologize to the Iranian people. That's really what needs to happen. And of course, we know Trump, he's never going to do that. But if he doesn't do that, we're just guaranteed to head down this path that's not going to end well. And I don't know, never say never, but I just don't think Trump has it in him to go on TV and say that, we were wrong and we shouldn't have done this. That's what he should do, but I don't think he will. All right, let's listen to Dr. Jiang wrap this up, and then we'll conclude the show.
So again, the key is the GCC. All right. So the game plan is this: you have to destroy the GCC. Why? Because the GCC is the linchpin of the American empire. So what the GCC does is this: it sells oil, and then for US dollars. Where does it put US dollars? It puts US dollars into the American stock market. All right, so this is investments of the UAE, okay, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait into the US financial markets. As you can see, from 2012 up to today, it's been exploding, all right? Because the US financial markets is one of the safest places where you can put your money. The intention is this: the intention is, hey, if I cut off oil and these countries no longer have access to US dollars, they're forced to spend whatever resources they have on protecting themselves, okay? And then guess what happens? The stock market collapses. The stock market collapses. The stock market is the real growth engine of the US economy. The entire US economy collapses with it, all right? There are about maybe 7 companies in America that accounts for about a quarter of stock market.
Okay, we know what the 7 companies are. They're Apple, Google, Facebook, NVIDIA, so on and so forth, okay? But I just want to take issue, the entire economy is not the stock market, okay? This is, even if it was, it's incorrect to, we shouldn't want that, okay? I guess is really what I'm trying to say. We should want an economy that makes things that are, commensurate with our standard of living. I mean, we don't need to make t-shirts, right? Because other countries like Bangladesh or Vietnam, they make t-shirts, and they make very high quality t-shirts, and they make them and sell them to us, right? So we don't need to make t-shirts, but we need to make things like Caterpillar engines, Detroit diesel, turbines. We need to make maybe even more things, like we need to do more high value engineering here in the US or something. I don't know. I mean, that's the point, is no one person could know everything that needs to happen in an economy. But once kind of the stock market collapses, the revenue starts to drop off, the government can't get the amount of money that it needs, what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of people unemployed, right? Because this connection to government is going to go away. Okay. If your job is directly or indirectly connected to government, and you might say, well, Seth's everybody's job's connected to government. No, not true. There's a lot of people that work in America that don't benefit at all from any kind of association with the government. In fact, most companies, it's just the cronies and the connected class that has this, this line in to the federal government and the federal government money, the NGO class, let's call them that. But what'll happen is there'll be a huge surplus of labor. Maybe everybody's labor goes down. Maybe we start manufacturing more things, investment maybe comes in and we start manufacturing things that we've sent to China. Maybe iPhones get manufactured here. Maybe more computers get manufactured here. Maybe, I don't know. But what'll happen once you get rid of this phony part of the economy, which is, I think, very connected to the stock market. Let's say 60% of the population is employed either directly by government somewhere, some tier of government, or indirectly by government. Well, then all of a sudden you have a huge pool of labor, right? So there's going to be a whole bunch of things we can manufacture that we wouldn't otherwise manufacture. And I don't know, maybe it won't go down like that. I'm just saying that the financialization of America, which he's talking about the financialization of America going away. Okay, this loop that's created because of the petrodollar and our ability to consume more than we produce creates this financial loop. And I agree with him. It's going away. One way or another, it's going away. Okay, because it's not really sustainable the way it is. All right, well, that's Dr. Jiang. Very interesting thesis he's putting out there, and he's backing it up with very good argument for his position, and I think it's pretty hard to dispute. And my recommendation to Trump and the Trump administration and anybody that's listening out there, we should all be clamoring for this war to end immediately, because this is just another type of doomsday scenario that could happen. I mean, again, we're all familiar with the nuclear war version, but this is kind of a non-nuclear version that could spiral into nuclear war. As he said, how bad do you want to win if you're losing? How bad do you need to take out the enemy? And look, I always just go back to, these are human beings. We may not agree with them on everything. We may not agree with them on most things, but they're human beings, and we're all human beings. And there's an element of us that's all the same. Okay. We're all the same, at least in God's eyes, we're all the same. And I just think that we need to start looking at the world in that way. It's a much smaller place now. It's much more interdependent, and we need to start behaving that way, or I don't know, humanity might cease to exist. That's the downside of not behaving that way. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, not exactly a positive note, but I'm going to wrap up. One thing I want to say is I'm going on vacation next week, so I know I haven't been putting out many shows, probably won't put any out next week. And so I just want to let you guys know that I'll be taking a break, and but come back, keep an eye open for new shows, and we'll be back soon to have another one for you here on Who Gets to Decide. All right, I'm out. Peace.